UCL Knowledge Lab, entitled The Empathy Diaries, Thinking About Technology and Self. I'm Professor Alison Littlejohn, the lab director, and I'll be chairing this event. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Sherry Turkle as our speaker. Later in the event, Sherry will be taking your questions, so please post questions using the Q&A facility on Zoom. Tweet about the event using the hashtag #NOSLecture. And just so you're aware, we're recording this event and we'll make it online. Now to the event. This lecture series celebrates the lab's founder, Professor Richard Noss. Now, Richard's vision was to create a world-leading cross-disciplinary research centre exploring technology and society. And today, the lab draws scholars from a wide range of fields, from education to sociology, from digital media to computer science, offering path-breaking insights. And we want this lecture series to both celebrate and advance that vision. Now, this year, we're very pleased Sherry Turkle joins us to discuss her pioneering work on our relationship with technology. The Rockefeller Mauzé Professor of the Social Studies of Science and Technology at MIT, Sherry has worked across sociology and psychology to chart how technology not just changes what we do, but who we are. And last year, she published the Empathy Diaries, a memoir charting her decades-long journey in this field. So that's our starting point. This event is a conversation between Sherry and Professor Dame Celia Hoyles, who's Chair Mathematics Education in the Knowledge Lab. First, though, over to Professor Richard Noss for some opening remarks. Richard.
Thank you. I have to admit, it still feels a bit weird. I mean, having a lecture, I never thought I'd have a lecture series named after me, but there you are. But that's not what I want to say first. The first thing I want to say is I'm still here. And there's been some friendly debate on this question over the last few weeks and months. So let there be no doubt about it. But on a slightly more serious note, I want to, for my second point out just how important a debt I owe to MIT and the people and things that I saw being built 25, 30 years ago. There's no question that that's where and I think Celia too, first learned that if you want to study people and things, you have to study them both together. And the idea that design is a crucial element of that has figured largely in the Knowledge Lab, larger than I even dared to think. And that's nearly finished. I just want to say one more thing, which is thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to everybody who made this possible. And I'll leave it to Sherry.
I think actually
an introduction.
Have I got that wrong way around? Okay.
No, I think actually it's me next, and I just want to very, very briefly say, I just want to reiterate what Richard and what Alison said. Sherry, thank you very much for agreeing to have this conversation. This conversation is going to be mainly you, I hasten to say, because that's why people have logged in. But I want to start by saying we're absolutely thrilled. And I also have a slight grumble about it, Sherry, because I'm a bit of a good girl. And Richard and I read your book. We actually bought it 2 years ago, a year ago. And I thought last week, I better reread this book because I'm going to have the chance to have this conversation with you. And I spent hours, and Richard kept saying to me, honestly, you're not giving the talk, Sherry is, but I have annotated it. And I do say it's just full of so many things that I feel really strongly about. And I really appreciate what you said, whether it's thinking about objects and objects to think with and your time at MIT, but also evocative objects. And I have got very high-heeled shoes on because I always wear high-heeled shoes when I'm doing anything important. Anyway, enough of me. I'm now going to say thank you very much for this. And I'm now going to ask you my first question, which is what got you into the study of technology all those years ago, Sherry, for somebody who's come from a very different background from many of us here in the lab?
Well, I first want to thank you for the nice things you say about my book. I have my book here with me too, this memoir. And for those of you who know my work, I've written about children and computers, how we should text, not talk, in order to maintain the most empathic communication. I'm now studying, what the metaverse is likely to do to our sensibility, why robots should not be psychotherapists. I mean, that's been my, the study of technology and our sensibility is kind of what I have done in my career. And this book is a departure because it's the story of how my personal life is intricated with that passion for studying technology and people. And because at a certain point, I realized that my study of technology and the human condition was not a job, it was a passion. And to your question as to when that began, it was really when I took a job at MIT. I thought it would be a one-year place to write a dissertation about Jacques Lacan. And I was invited to give a seminar about the relationship between psychoanalysis and artificial intelligence, how they were both ideas that began in the seminar room, but were going to hit the larger culture. And I kind of was doing it as I was writing my dissertation because I was there as a kind of research fellow. And as I was maybe the first day of teaching, somebody talked about how they didn't like being interrupted because their mind was a mental terrain that needed to be cleared and crossed before they had access to interactive processing capacity. Somebody else talked about reprogramming their mind as a way to have better relationships. I mean, in other words, students were using computational metaphors to talk about the self. And I just kind of stopped and I thought, I am watching unfold before me the most fascinating thing that could be the Freudian metaphors of meaning were giving way to these computational metaphors of mechanism. People really were using the computer in front of my eyes as a way of thinking about the self. I tried to say to these students, isn't this interesting? And they were like, no, this is just what we do. And I just said, I'm not here for a year. I am settling in. I'm going to see if I can get a job here. Because I was on my way to some humanities department or some literature department. I said, I am trying to stay here. And I just became fascinated with this, I just became fascinated with this topic. It just became my life's work. So that's how it started. And then on a deeper level, I mean, to complexify this question, I realized that my life had prepared me for what Richard just referred to as the study of things and thinking. That deep in my own interest in psychoanalysis was the belief that a kind of an object relations theory in psychoanalysis, that the playing with things, the things, we love the objects we think with the objects we love. That this is something that very early I realized that I shared, not just with psychoanalysts all over the world, but with a research group at MIT that was led by Seymour Papert. And he perhaps didn't put it in as psychoanalytic a way in thinking about the logo language. But as I began to work with his team and talk to his team and pitch him about this more psychodynamic way of thinking about what they were doing, I realized this tremendous commonality of interest. And I began studying programming as a new way of thinking about the self. So there were many points of entrance to my becoming, falling in love with technology as something to study.
Well, you mentioned Seymour Papert and programming, and as you know, Richard and I were very, as well as being influenced by very influenced by that. So I want to ask you a bit more about that section and about what was Seymour Papert's greatest contribution to your work intellectually and personally. But I also wanted you to also, as a sort of advanced organizer, in your book, you say, you talk about the vision that Seymour had, and then you say on page 272, which is one of the bits I've marked, you said that there was this vision that children would explore in Mathland. That was Seymour's vision, and learn maths like they learn French. And you say, sadly, this has not happened. Seymour's dream of every child with a computer no longer seems utopian. Every child has a computer, at least in the developed world, but few children who have laptops, tablets, or phones live in Mathland. A child immersed in opaque apps is not learning powerful computational ideas. And I thought that was a really good thing, that in a way we were all slightly disappointed. But and then I'm going to shut up because I want you to talk about programming a bit, because just in case you don't know, that in this country, in England, every child has to learn programming from age 6 to age 16. And I happen to know there'll be a lot of people watching you who will be teaching programming. They have to, it's part of the statutory national curriculum. And you have some quite strong views about teaching programming in terms of what you wrote in the second self, but also what you've talked about here. So I want to try and steer you a bit into that.
Yes, well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. In other words, a lot of people had to work very hard in your country and do a lot of hard political educational work in order to make that happen. That work in the United States, for example, I mean, I would say that there has been a backsliding. There are pockets where you can find children learning to program. So I don't want to say that there are children learning to program Scratch, for example. There's a nationwide movement of children excitedly learning to use programming languages and workshops and at-home things and communities. Yes, but the educational system has not, this is a very decentralized educational system. It has not made programming. It has not come to understand and push and appreciate programming and computational ideas as things that are powerful for children to understand. It has not embraced transparency about the computer as something that would be good for children. And you can see this, for example, in the way people talk about, let's go into the metaverse. Let's go into the metaverse and do wonderful things in the metaverse. There's no, all the discussion is, let's get kids into the metaverse so they can play games, so they can, have different kinds of, be in the Himalayas and have see a Paris street without a Paris street. There's no discussion of what might be there for them to learn other than sort of addictive content, in the kind of discussion of why this might be a good thing. I mean, everybody's pushing it, but they're not pushing, computational ideas about it. So, I really did grow up and really believed that one of the exciting things about having this new object were the ideas that this new object carried. And, you know, I have my phone here in case something goes badly and you need to call me and tell me to change the settings on my computer. But children who are playing with their phones are not learning those ideas. So I'm very impressed and proud of what you've accomplished in the UK, and that war is being waged in the United States, but I don't think with the same success.
But you
I go into most classrooms, you know, Google or Facebook. I mean, there's been a giveaway of a Surface tablet or a, you know, some kind of computational device, and kids are using programs that are not teaching them about programming itself.
Maybe you should say a little bit about I remember you, in your book, you talk about the engineer's approach to programming, which is very much top down.
Yes.
You know, you do it like this in your 3 parts. I thought it was wonderful, but you started bottom up and then you made it top down sort of thing.
Exactly.
Maybe talk a bit about that.
One of the papers, I mean, we were going to say about what did my relationship with Seymour, my friendship with Seymour, and then I should say it, for Seymour and I were married for a while, so we were very close. We were, our personal relationship became troubled, but our professional relationship was very robust and successful. I mean, I would say, to anticipate that question, because that's where your question leads, is that one of the most exciting intellectual things we did together was to write a paper called Epistemological Pluralism, which really brought together my ideas about cognitive and emotional styles and his ideas about programming and programming styles. And one of the things that we were able to show is that engineers and engineering dogma about how to program stressed, you know, top-down, divide and conquer, kind of an engineering style of top-down programming. And when engineers wrote engineering curriculum for teaching children to program, that's how they wrote the curriculum. And not surprisingly, people who didn't have that style of mastery didn't like it, felt it wasn't for them. A lot of women dropped out. I mean, it's not something only associated with women, but a lot of women did drop out. And when I saw that, when I was studying those classrooms, I said, you know, this reminds me of my time living in France and having to write papers the French way, which was in 3 parts. And each of the 3 parts had to have 3 parts. And I had to hand in the outline first. And then I had, in a week to hand in the outline. And then I had 2 more weeks to fill in the paper. And then I had to hand in the paper. And I don't write that way. I write, you know, in bits and pieces and kind of collage and bring them together. And then in the end, my books are really organized. My papers are really organized. I think they usually have 3 parts, with each of the 3 parts having 3 parts. But it comes together really bottom up, because I work from data, I work from anecdotes, I work from interviews, I work from powerful examples that have made an impression on me. I said, you know, I think that I wouldn't do so well in these programming courses, not because I don't think I could be a good programmer, but because I need a pluralistic way of learning that allows me to do what I did in my French class, was to write my essay all in the first week for my little bits and, you know, the little ways I do it with my little bits and pieces of paper and bringing it together, and then extract my outline, turn in my outline, and then just leave my paper in the drawer until I had to turn it in. In other words, I did it as a bricoleur, as they say in France, as a tinkerer, and then, you know, adapted, just had to do it really quickly in order to make it look like I did the outline first. And Seymour and I talked about that, and we wrote a paper that was about allowing different styles of mastery in programming. So I feel very strongly both that programming is something that really should be taught, and the importance of not just thinking of it as a skill, but as a way to understand important ideas about this new object that shouldn't just be a black box, but also opening up programming to people who have different styles of mastery, being more pluralistic about what it means to get your hands on this object. And I'm very proud of that, that collaboration. I think that was probably the most important collaboration we did. And I'm very proud that that more fluid way of thinking about what it is to teach programming has had some influence. I think that's important. I don't think the computer is just for engineers, or programming should be just for engineers. I think it's a crucial part of our culture and should be for everyone. Because if it was for everyone, you would have a different level of literacy in talking about something like Facebook and its algorithms, in talking about surveillance, in talking about all the important ways in which technical matters now impinge on our social and political life. And people who don't know how to program, who don't know what an algorithm is, who feel this is mysterious and for engineers, don't have that confidence to feel that they own this technology and really can assert themselves. So that's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it reminds me of during the COVID lockdowns, there were lots of things about algorithms, the algorithm that told people what their exam scores were. And somehow it became much more visible, because I think a lot of us knew that a lot of our lives were driven by these algorithms. We knew them. Anybody who knows anything about educational system knows this, but suddenly it became much more visible. And I think that's something that I found really wonderful in your book, is you keep talking about how things have become more visible. But you also say, and again on in which I think is really interesting, you say the first Mac, it seems like stay on the surface, and you say, and take things at interface value. When the world comes to us in simulation, we lose the sense of what lies beneath. And I know so many of us, we want to try and get at what lies beneath, and not just this sort of froth on the surface. I don't know if you'd like to say more.
In other words, I try to mark at a certain point in my work, very early. I loved the Mac; it was beautiful. I mean, I saw the inspiration, I saw the aesthetic, and I also saw there was also a great sense of loss. Because, I'm not here to defend the clunkiness of the DOS operating system. I mean, I was not put on this earth I'm a Mac user. I was not put on this earth to turn back time. But you have to understand that there could have been a way to open up that system and use all the brilliance. And it's not too late. I mean, I'm still arguing for this, as are people, as are you, to find a way to open up and represent what lies beneath. And that is what we have never done. So that people just, it's computers, it's the computer, it's the computer. And the opacity of simulation. I wrote a book called Simulation and Its Discontents. And I love that book because it makes this point that when you make everything a black box, people get into an intellectual habit of letting the black box be closed. And that was the danger of Facebook was able to, and not just Facebook, but I mean all social media, all of social media, was able to exploit that habit of mind that people had gotten into of getting out of the habit of opening up the black box. We're all in the habit now of taking things at interface value. And that is a great moment of loss. And now that has touched our democracy, people really didn't understand how this worked. You voted, but then what happened next? And that there were people, I'm speaking now about my country, went to a board of electors and they did something, and people just kind of voted and assumed everything would be okay. And now all of a sudden there's boards of electors and they needed to certify. And now we are opening up the black box and realizing there are a lot of steps that can go wrong. And what about these steps? And as you were saying about COVID, when you open these steps and see, well, people who don't believe in democracy get into these extra steps that that were in the black box, you better understand how it works. And there are so many things in our society and in our learning where we've allowed ourselves, in our politics, where we've allowed ourselves to keep that black box closed. And that's the danger of computation when that black box is closed. And I think that was the excitement for me of the early logo movement, that it was about intellectual transparency, which fit into my interest in psychoanalysis, which fit into my interest in things and thinking and using objects to better understand your own reflective process.
So,
because after all,
yes.
This notion of Seymour would say, in order to think, you need to think about something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it concretized the problem of self-reflection by saying, well, you're thinking about yourself, but to think about yourself, it'd be better if you were thinking about something. And my book, Evocative Objects, literally asks people, what's your favorite object? Not about computers, but people said a string of pearls, my mother's simple pin, this bobby pin, this teacup. Mine was my grandmother's dishes. And then I said, well, talk to me about it. And then they would turn that into an essay, and you have people where you learn so much about them by getting them to talk about the object that they loved. And actually, just to end this section about Seymour and what he taught me personally and intellectually, when Seymour met my grandfather, and this is a story I tell in the Empathy Diaries, Seymour was quite a bit older than me, and my grandfather was not happy about that. But I said, listen, Grandpa, give him a chance, just give him a chance. So Seymour, who was a very smart man, brought 3 red balls to his first meeting with my grandfather. And he taught my grandfather to juggle. And my grandfather must have been close to 80 years old. And it was really a surprise to my grandfather that he was getting taught to juggle. But, little bit he juggled. And then, of course, Seymour didn't care about the juggling. He cared about the conversation about the juggling. And my grandfather started to talk about the last time he had learned something new, which was when he had been a bookbinder on the Lower East Side as a young man, and what that felt like, and working with those materials and just learning the rules. And it ended up to be a conversation about something concrete, learning to juggle, leading to learning how to learn. And they were talking about bookbinding. And I just sat there. And what that taught me was that to win my grandfather's heart, you just had to get him talking about something that would make my grandfather fall a little bit in love with himself as a learner. And I think that's probably a general rule of life, that you win over people as learners and as thinkers by getting them to fall in love with themselves as learners. So that was a moment when that all came together for me.
I think that's a wonderful story, actually. I'm just trying to imagine meeting somebody as important as your...
You can't imagine, because when you teach somebody something and then you say, wow, you've just learned something. What was the last time you really learned something so powerful? If you ask that from a man who spent a life in sort of hard work, he had a difficult job and nobody had really shown any interest in him as a learner. And then all of a sudden this man says, when was the last time you really learned? And my grandfather really thought about it and found the last time he had loved to learn something. And there it was. And of course he fell in love with Seymour and he gave me no trouble. When are you marrying him? Snap this guy up, Let's juggle. Let's juggle.
It's that your book is full of these wonderful incidents, actually, that you describe so well. But I just wonder, where do you think your message has succeeded, and where do you think it hasn't? And, what's your next step? Because I think it's the messages are so brilliant and well written and evocative. Where have we moved forward, and where has it failed?
Well, it's interesting. I just wrote a prospectus for a new book that I think is very smart about where I think we're going. It's about, I didn't have a great title, so I don't want to say what the title was, but it's about the dangers that I see. And I sent it to my agent, who said, absolutely not. Nobody wants to hear about a book. Nobody wants a book about critique of AI and computers, and nobody's interested in this anymore. And if you want to change agents, go ahead, but there's no market for this. And I'm a good writer, and it was a very smart proposal. It wasn't, it was filled with interesting ideas about our moment. So I'm going to continue on. I'll either find another agent, or I'm going to continue working. It's just one. I may have to find. I guess I have to find another agent. But for someone of great literary success, as this agent is, to be able to say, nobody wants to hear about the problems of AI and computing and the metaverse, and been there, done that. To a book that argues that we are at a tip, a break the glass moment, which is what the book argued, in robots reading to children, and slots. I'm a new grandmother, and so I see what's there for babies, and there's changing tables with slots for iPhones and potty trainers with slots for iPads, and we are really, and this metaverse, which is there to be a surveillance tool for, if not checked. For really serious people to say, well, there's at least as one serious person to say, I can't pitch this. Nobody will care about this. So I'm undeterred. I'm undeterred. However, for a serious person who really knows the market to say nobody's interested in this, that says something about people's fatigue with, there's a problem, we need to do something. That's what's so interesting about her response, is she's probably right. that people are tired. They want to hear that it's good. They want to hear, they don't want to hear that they're walking around with, you know, with a toxic thing. You know, they're people don't want to hear this. Mm-hmm. And no publisher wants to publish it. She had these statistics of the last 5 books that were published with a negative message, and you know, one had sold 33 copies probably to the person's family, and one had sold. And I think that the idea that we are tired of hearing how our technology is harming us, and yet there are sort of public figures and TV specials and Anderson Cooper and you know, conferences that make a big fuss, and you think people who are, you know, computer, and I get asked to speak, and you know, in a way we treat computer critics as though they're sort of not movie stars, but you know, an important part of the culture, and then you get a response like this, which is just, look, people are tired of this. They don't want to hear about this. Mm-hmm. I think that it's hard to feel successful because the way this metaverse program, even though people say, oh, no, nothing will come of it, and people are criticizing it, the way in which the boldness with which it's been rolled out, and okay, the first pass looks like it was rolled out too soon and people are making fun of it, but you know, you can see a commitment to wanting to move more and more of our lives online. And you can see how businesses and schools may well in the long run pick that up. So I think it's hard. I don't have a sense of job well done, Sherry. Job well done. I do feel that when I talk to parents, when I talk to teachers, when I talk to regular people, and maybe not literary agents, they completely understand my concerns. They've often read something I've written, or something one of my students has written, or something that somebody in my tribe has written, and they are very open to having some kinds of critique of of a world in which we're looking at each other with our phones in the way. So I think it's mixed. On the one hand, I win awards for my prescientness, for being prescient. On the one hand, I'm told that nobody wants to hear this kind of thing. They're tired of it. So I think we're at a point where it's hard for me to feel all puffed up by my awards, because I'm also often told we need to move on with AI and robots who read to children and robot psychotherapists. And the robot psychotherapist is a good example. Robot psychotherapy, chatbots, giant industry. And I've been writing about how this is a bad thing for 30 years, about how it means nothing. You know, pretend empathy is not empathy. And the dangers of pretend empathy, particularly for adolescents, the pretend empathy is really not what you want children to learn. I would have to say that this is not the place to get into it, and I certainly have written about it at length, but that message has not resonated. And so you ask yourself, well, that's a hard sell, apparently. Mm-hmm. But if I had a problem, if I had a problem with a child, with a relationship, or if any of you out there have a problem with a child, with a relationship, with a death, with a life, with a human problem, I beg you not to talk to a robot about it, they just will not have the, what do they call it in legal terms? The standing to chat with you about that problem.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to feel like a big success. On the other hand, I feel that there's more of a openness to the sorts of issues I've tried to raise during my career. So I mean, I don't feel like all was for nothing. So it's a mixed bag.
Certainly wasn't all for nothing. I've been told.
No. I mean, I'm just saying that there's just it's just odd. It's a tipping point moment, I think. I think it's a tipping point moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not celebrating yet.
I want to just mention one other thing that really affected Richard and I quite a bit. We were in Boston, and I think it was a time when you wrote your book Alone together.
Yes.
And Boston was a bit ahead of us in London about everyone having mobile devices. And I remember so well sitting in one of your wonderful cafes and everybody was on their mobile phones and not talking to each other. And you just caught it wonderfully in that book.
Yes.
I think that's so. I think actually your reservations then about how you think you're talking to people, but you're not, I think is something that really resonates now.
Well, I think I'm right. In other words, I think I've caught many. I mean, one of the big things about Alone Together is I was able to study this way of, there was a lot of field work in that book, where I studied how, what people call the rule of three, that if you're looking down at your phone and you see that in a group, but you see that three other people have their head up and are in a conversation, you feel free to keep your head down. But the trouble, as I studied those conversations, I realized that the topic of conversation that was happening in those conversations was superficial, because there's a certain kind of conversation that doesn't take place if half the people have their heads down. And that's what's so important. I'm not saying no talking is happening. I'm saying that the kinds of conversations we are having is different because half of us are looking down at our phones. That's a different, that's a different statement. And I'm very proud of that work because I think we are not having some of the human conversations we need to have. And we're at a point politically, socially, emotionally, empathically, but also politically in terms of our differences and our misunderstandings, where we do need to have the deepest conversations we can have. And those are not going to happen when half of us are looking down at our phones.
I think we've literally got 2 minutes. I just want to say, is there anything else you want to say to us? But writing this memoir is very personal. I mean, we've scratched the surface all throughout of it. It's really about Sherry Turkle, her whole life, and her personal life, her professional life, and the development of her ideas. I mean, it's just full of these incredible experiences. But did it have an effect on you, writing all this down about yourself and your life? How did it affect you in terms of expressing your own ideas?
Oh, it really changed me tremendously. I realized that it integrated my work and my life. It integrated my creative work and my inner life. It allowed me to bring them together in a way that was very, very satisfying. And I teach a course on memoir at MIT. And I begin the course by saying, every student writes a memoir, and a little bit of, they're young, so it's just a little bit of memoir. And I say, the reason to do this is it's not the end product. It's to have the experience of trying to understand your work in terms of your deeper self. And that process is something that not very many people ask of themselves. And asking that of myself and finding answers about why is my work so important to me? Why is my work on empathy so important to me? You know, this book was such a gift to me. So I just want to recommend that everyone who's interested in learning, who's interested in, you know, spend 3 months just doing that exercise. You don't have to publish anything, but I really think as a learning experience about the motivations for the work that you do, and it really was rewarding. It was just a gift. It was a gift to myself, and then other people liked it and have written me the most wonderful letters and appreciations because it helped them start their own process of self-reflection. And I'm very proud of it because my one rule was just tell the truth. You don't have to tell everything that happened to you. It's not a confessional, but, you know, tell the truth of your story. And it was very wonderful. So I'm glad you liked it.
Very much. Thank you very much. I think I better now pass over. Thank you, Sherry. You're staying there, to Alison, who's going to field some questions that have from the chat. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful talking to you. Alison.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope, Celia, you'll stay part of it. So we'd like to open up the conversation a little bit and let the people who are participating to ask a question. So we've got some questions for you, Sherry, which I'm sure we'd love to hear your discussion about it. We've got one from Sarah Joseph, who thanks you for your talk. And Sarah wonders if you could explore the idea of digital things and what you've called in your writing alive enough, and how potentially humans are settling for alive enough. So here's a question. It's a little bit long, but please listen.
Well,
Sarah,
was that the question?
There's a question. Here's a question.
I thought that was the question. Okay.
So we have digital medicine, digital education, digital elderly care, digital sex robots, and all of this allows us to bring to scale certain services. But are we not settling for a reduced experience that's less than what humans deserve, and indeed what humans need? What do you think?
Yes. That's what I've said. We're settling. Digital services are one thing. So if you have a robot, I mean, I'm not a purist, you know, I mean, what's the opposite of a purist? I'm a reasonable personist. You know, if you have a bedridden elderly person, and if you have a machine that facilitates bringing pills, drinks, you know, I mean, a kind of service robot, I'm all in. You know, just like I didn't, you know, when people gave names to the Roomba and anthropomorphized the Roomba, you know, robot that did the floors, I didn't say, oh my God, you know, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. I said, oh, wow, I wonder if my hardwood floors could use that. I mean, but if you have a robot that is pretending to be empathic, that is pretending to understand your life story, you have to remember that this robot was not born, did not have a mother, didn't have to separate from parents, doesn't know what it means to feel hurt or sick or be little when other people are big or be afraid of death. And during COVID, a New York Times reporter called me and said, oh, we have a new therapy robot we want you to try. And I said, you mean you're looking for somebody to say something negative about this robot? He says, yes. I said, well, look, I'm going to give this robot a fair shot. Send me this therapy robot. And they set me up with this therapy robot. I won't say which one. And I said to it, you know, can you talk about loneliness? Because I'm living alone during COVID, and that is my main problem. Are you able to do that? And this robot said, absolutely, talk about loneliness. So I said, okay, well, that's my problem. What? And the robot had a glitch, which I'm sure they fixed the next day. And it said, loneliness it can be warm and cozy. I took a screenshot. I sent it back to the New York Times reporter. I said, this is a glitch, a programming error. This robot is very smart. I'm sure they've already fixed this when they saw that this robot told me that loneliness is warm and fuzzy. But my point is, why shouldn't this chatbot think that loneliness is warm and fuzzy? Because it picked it up from some piece of thing on the internet and it made a mistake. The robot has never known what it's like to live alone during COVID and be frightened of being intubated or saying your goodbye on a screen. And that's my point, that when it comes to things that need empathy and that need the arc of a human life to understand, that's when you need a person. So it's not a question of settling. It's a question of just get the right entity in for the job. And there just are some jobs that you just need a person for. And it's for the job of understanding the pain and the physicality and the terrors and the mortality of a human life, get in somebody who knows that. It's not complicated for me. And for all the other great things that robots can do, bring them in. So yes, I think, and as for robots reading to children, one of my colleagues just gave a speech at the UN about robots reading to children. And I just happen to have a new grandchild. And so I'm spending a lot of time watching what it's like when humans read to children. And the words are the least of it. The words are the least of it, of what's going on when human beings read to children. And, it starts off by saying, it's the only thing I want to end this on. It starts off by, roboticists will say, there are no other people for these jobs. So we have to send in robots because there are no people for these jobs. And that's how it's sold. And then the next thing is they're just selling them to schools even when there are people for the jobs. Because it just becomes a cheaper and a better way. I mean, it starts out that there's nobody else available, and then it just becomes something that becomes part of the landscape and we're used to it. And so, yes, I appreciate this question. And I think that we become used to machines in roles where they have no place being.
Yeah, well, I want to move on to a question from Emma Wisby. So earlier we talked about the rollout in terms of coding education. And Emma says, from what Sherry said, it sounded a bit like reading wars and the idea that phonics is or isn't the only way to teach reading. Is that a fair comparison of the state of coding education?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's fair, because ultimately, after you finished phonics, you were a reader and you could move on to the next step. In coding, but in terms of learning to program, it might be. But I think that but the difference in phonics is I don't think you had the dropout rate. People got beyond. It wasn't the best way, but people got beyond. I think in the coding situation, people, what Seymour and I found is people just said, well, I'm just not going to do this. I don't need to become a programmer. And this top-down thing is like, engineers can do this. I'm a humanist. In the phonics example, people who were not perfect for phonics were bullied and powered their way through. They became readers, and it wasn't optimum, but they powered their way through, and it wasn't optimum. So I'm going to have to think more about it, because it actually is a great example. Yeah. But it's a great question, but I need to think if historically it actually holds up.
Well, we have another question from Dan, and Dan's asking, how do you relate to the new strong AI and the potential of human-computer cooperation?
Well, I mean, I think it depends what you're doing with the AI. I mean, that's why I'm saying it's case by case. Robots reading to children? No. Robots doing psychotherapy? No. Robots helping astronauts fix spacecraft? Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, robots being sent out to detoxify landmines so people don't have to. Great idea. I mean, I'm like, my problem is with AIs that say, tell me your story and let's chat about your life. Let me read to your child and show the empathy and care that this child needs developmentally. And you don't need as many teachers, as many childcare workers. Let me, there are seniors who are just watching television, don't have to hire more, don't have to raise pay for that group. Not too many people want that job. I'll chat with those seniors. And that's a very vulnerable population with whom I've done a lot of work, and they are happy to have a robot talk to them. And there is something, and I've written about it a lot, there is something so heart deadening about watching a senior telling a robot the story of a child's death. And the robot is, yes, that must have been tough. And this robot doesn't know what a child is, doesn't know what a death is. I mean, is repeating back a script, and the senior feels heard. When you watch it, when you actually watch it, it's horrible. And as I get to the age where being a senior doesn't seem like, like such a distant eventuality, plug me into books on tape, some Jane Austen. I don't want to have fake conversations with robots about the story of my life, because it's profoundly inauthentic. This pretend empathy we owe ourselves, and to me, this is me talking, and this is what was so wonderful about writing this memoir, is that I could understand, by thinking about my grandparents and my mother, what I think we owe each other across the generations. Across the generations, we owe our seniors an understanding of what they're saying when they say, and I miss my daughter, and here's what she meant to me. We owe them better than a robot saying, To me, that was a terrible moment. And yet that's being pushed because there are not enough people to listen to the seniors. And I think that when we start to see people that way, as people we can sort of process with a robot, because who cares if they're really heard, we are crossing a line in our own humanity. And that really is how I feel.
Sherry, I think that's a very powerful point to end on. It's been a fascinating conversation. Time's flown, and I want to sincerely thank you for being part of the Richard Noss lecture. And thank you also to Celia for bringing out this conversation. The relationship that you both have had for a long time came out very strongly. So thank you also to everybody who's joined in, and for those who sent questions. And we shall see you next year at the next Richard Noss lecture. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sherry.
What a pleasure.
Thank you, Sherry.